Reality constructed as difference from pattern is, as Yeats says, tragic, but allows the affirmation of greater secondary institutions, in Yeats' case, such as myth or the state. In Lowell and in postmodern poetry in general, the failure of secondary institutions like myth and state causes the collapse of the image of persons. And that is evidence of the failed motive of modernism to construct not merely poems, but the institutions that reproduce the possibility of the reproduction of poetic knowledge. Yeats, driven to found institution after institution, including the Irish Republic, to which he substantially contributed. Eliot, with his emphasis upon the renovation of churches and so on. Pound with the Esri University and all that stuff, which was clearly effort to reconstitute the institution of the art itself. Here in Lowell, make clear their reasons. For there is no substantiating institution which mediates the power of the words that Lowell seeks to apply to immortal life. The best he can do is L.L. Bean, and there are some limits to even their catalog as an empowering book. In Lowell and in postmodern poetry in general, the failure of secondary institutions causes or is intimately associated with the collapse of the image of persons. Poetry is profoundly dependent, we now see, on the intactness of institutions other than itself. And the modernist poets gave immense attention, as I have said, to the building up of church, state, and money, insurance, as they understood them. Postmodern poetry seems to suppose that poetry or representation is its own substantiation, which is, in my view, and I think upon the evidence of the poetry before us, impossible. The litter of proper names and technical specificities in this poem by Lowell is testimony to the exhaustion in the social world of the institutional empowerments, including nature, also an institution, which are required to contribute the substantiating basis of the person-making work of the poem. In the face of the loss of the patterns of order by which the self becomes categorizable, even the local interior decorator has given up. The speaker goes in search of the renewal of primary encounter. In Lowell's poem, as in Keats, the speaker journeys to Philomela, as in Dickinson, to the face that saturates sight, or as in Yeats, the speaker turns to and addresses the principle he wishes to serve, O presences in among school children. I will now read the second half of Skunk Hour, One Dark Night. We proceed from general state of affairs, the decline of civilization characterized by order and history, to the particular state of affairs, which is genealogically related to that decline and enacts its implications for the person. One dark night, my tutor Ford climbed the hill's skull. I watched for love cars. Lights turned down, they lay together hull to hull, where the graveyard shelves on the town. My mind's not right. A car radio bleats, love, oh careless love. I hear my ill spirit sob in each blood cell, as if my hand were at its throat. I myself am hell, nobody's here. Only skunks that search in the moonlight for a bite to eat. They march on their souls up Main Street. White stripes, moonstruck, eyes red fire, under the chalk dry and spire of the Trinitarian Church. I stand on top of our back steps and breathe the rich air. A mother skunk with her column of kittens swills the garbage pail. She jabs her wedge head in a cup of sour cream, drops her ostrich tail, and will not scare. The abyss at the end of Lowell's sixth stanza, I myself am hell, nobody's here, is easy now for us to trace back to the last stanza but one of Dickinson's 640, and I condemned to be where you were not, that self were hell to me. Both Lowell and Dickinson are thinking of a speech of Milton's Satan, all refer to the intolerability of a terminal individualism, the result of the failure of mediations, love, oh careless love, which Dickinson actively recovers. Lowell's speaker returns home, our back porch, encounters the skunks in the garbage, the presence of which must qualify his last action. I stand on top of our back steps and breathe the rich air, garbage and skunk enriched. In the last image the poem presents, the image of the intrepid animal who isn't afraid, we must note the poet's repetition of the failure of substantial figuration, which makes all the obsessive nomenclature in this and other poems by Lowell not mistakable, unmistakable confirmation of the absence from the linear narrative of history as Lowell registers it of a name which constructs the person. There is no genealogy which connects Lowells and skunks. They can't breed. At the end of Lowell's poem, I am convinced of the actuality of the human world, but equally convinced that the animal is nothing more than a placeholder for an inaccessible image which would supply the further necessary conviction of the certainty not only of the one person, but of other persons. Lowell's poem here, like Yeats among school children, belongs to what I am calling the pattern class of poems, and both declare the end of the cultural viability of that species. Both are spectral texts, unreal objects of thought, which accomplish the artifactual requirements of the poem of excellence, but fail to do the cultural work which is the reason for the being of the poem. I now turn to the matrix system, which is an act of judgment upon my part. It's perfectly obvious I favor, in which I place the children's game, the Ballad of Sir Patrick Spens, Keats' Nightingale Ode, which belongs in various respects, as I have said, to both categories, Dickinson's 640 and Bishop's poem, with which I will conclude these lectures. In Lowell's Skunk Hour, you will note that the vertical lines, the stanzas, are all very exactly 6, and that the poem is divided or parsed very exactly in the arithmetic middle of the vertical sequence of stanzas. By contrast, the horizontal lines of Lowell's poem are arithmetically variable, except insofar as the first and sixth line of each stanza tend to be short. In general, the vertical line of a poem signifies relationship to the world of fact, however that world is understood, and the horizontal line, the line of syllables, to the world of persons. Lowell's speakers understand facts, but not the relation of facts to persons, which is to say, the meaning of facts. As we turn to Bishop's poem, the poem to which Lowell's is responding, we see a linear system very certain in the vertical line and in the horizontal line. I'm speaking now of Bishop's stanza and her line, working toward the order of 8 positions to which it obtains firmly in the last italicized quatrain. Like the ballad singer, the speaker in Bishop's poem speaks only in the first person plural. Her speaker is at some distance from the world she describes. That distance resembles the distance of general knowledge, the knowledge possessed, for example, by a folk rather than an individual, in which particular states of affairs can become significant because relations among facts of the world are always already known, and speaking does reach, therefore, to the certainty of persons. What is most important to me, however, is that the speaker of Bishop's poem possesses the fundamental poetic knowledge of the artifactuality, the madeness of primary symbols. Lowell's skunks authorize by naturalizing, being facts of nature themselves, irreducibly natural as his rhetoric proposes. Lowell's skunks authorized by naturalizing the blindness of consciousness to its own histories, the illness of the mind of which he complains, just as surely as Yeats ontologizes, makes part of the unalterable, historyless otherness of being the presences which he addresses, self-born mockers. Bishop's poem ends in the strange double apostrophe of undeceiving, addressed to the sources of making. Remember Keats, the fancy cannot cheat so well as she is famed to do, which joins the artifacts of civilization in a single line with its victims. O falling fire and piercing cry, for whom the speaker, as hermeneutic interpreter or friend, assigns meaning to appearances as a consciousness on behalf of the other, the weak mailed fist, clenched ignorant against the sky. We enter Bishop's poem, as you will remember, at a particularized, a torn, or illegal moment in cyclical time, which has been differentiated from the stream of time by an accidental gust of wind, of which the speaker makes a meaning. The fire balloons are, of course, paper hot air devices, artifices of personal presence as our hearts. The armadillo. This is the time of year when almost every night the frail, illegal fire balloons appear, climbing the mountain height, rising toward a saint still honored in these parts. The paper chambers flush and fill with light that comes and goes like hearts. Once up against the sky, it's hard to tell them from the stars. Planets, that is, the tinted ones, Venus going down, or Mars, or the pale green one. With a wind, they flare and falter, wobble and tossed. But if it's still, they steer between the kite sticks of the Southern Cross, receding, dwindling, solemnly and steadily forsaking us, or in the downdraft from a peak, suddenly turning dangerous. Last night, another big one fell. It splattered like an egg of fire against the cliff behind the house. The flame ran down. We saw the pair of owls who nest there flying up and up, their whirling black and white stained bright pink underneath, until they shrieked up out of sight. The ancient owl's nest must have burned. Hastily, all alone, a glistening armadillo left the scene, rose-flecked, head down, tail down. And then a baby rabbit jumped out, short-eared to our surprise, so soft, a handful of intangible ash with fixed, ignited eyes. Too pretty, dreamlike, mimicry, oh falling fire and piercing cry and panic and a weak mailed fist clenched ignorant against the sky. Bishop's apostrophe addressed to the dreamlike mimicry of the fire balloons is strictly analogous to the apostrophe of Yeats' speaker to the presences, Keats' strange address to the immortal bird who was not born for death. But like all speaking from matrix, Bishop's apostrophe functions as a calling from the source which knows the person, as it were, from an authoritative actual station in the world toward the fact of art. The voice from the matrix is clear about the fundamental moral ambiguity which attends all intervention of artifice in the world. The voice from the matrix is clear about the fundamental moral ambiguity. Too pretty, dreamlike mimicry, oh falling fire and piercing cry, which attends all intervention of artifice in the world. Such authoritative clarity in Bishop's speaker is kindred to the knowledge sung by Sir Patrick Spen's companion, knowledge of the time of year, late, late yestreen. I saw the new moon with the old moon in her arms, a voice which knows what the king, master of the pattern, does not know. The fire balloon, like a heart, lights up the world in which the heart is concerned, but it does so at the point of destruction. Artifice is put in question. Too pretty, dreamlike, mimicry. Artifice is put in question by the voice from the matrix. But the will is not enabled. The apostrophe are addressed to dreamlike mimicry, which demystifies the otherwise mysterious fire balloon of artifice, is not distinguishable from a helpless exclamation repeating the enraged impotence of the weak mailed fist clenched ignorance against the sky. The last stanza of the Armadillo, as you can see, has no verb, finds no way for the will to engage itself with the state of affairs which it has discovered. Between the idealism of the pattern and the idealism of the matrix, between or beyond, there does most surely lie a third class of poems, which is our work as moral persons, as students, and many of us as the writers of poetry to find. There most surely does lie a third class of poems. Poetry is still a principle of power invoked by all of us against our vanishing. The making of poems is a practice, a work human beings can do, in which civilization has invested some part of its love of itself and the world. The poem is a trace of the will of all persons to be known and to be made and to make known, and therefore to be at all. Insofar as love wills the existence of what it loves, the principle of poetry is a collective and perpetually renewed act of love that brings the world to mind and mind to mind as the speech of a person at the moment of the vanishing of world and persons, which is every moment of conscious life. One of the great motives of mind, one which I honor, is to know itself. In order to know itself, the mind requires a medium in which it can become present to itself. In poetry, the mind becomes present to itself by becoming present to others in the medium of an art by which the general will to presence of the human world is made actual and particular. Poetry is one means by which human beings engage as they can in the maintenance of a human world in which they can meet one another, affirm one another, remember, see, and foresee one another. Reading, writing, thinking, and talking about poetry engage the mind with itself on grounds of the work of love that wills the world. So, my friends, there is good reason to set our minds to the work. Somehow, as Dickens' son makes it possible for me to say, it is the face that saturates sight. Thank you very much.